name is Ewok's Many Paths of the Wolf Clan, and I am from the place of the Pike, or as you guys know it, the place where Bay Mills Resort and Casinos is located. So I'm elected chairman of Bay Mills Indian Community. I grew up there. I lived there with my family, who was kind enough to be forced to come out here this afternoon. And although I too have a legal background, I am a recovering lawyer because I am now a public elected official, and I'm in that 12-step program for recovering attorneys. I think I'm in that, or not I think, I'm in that stage where I have to go around apologizing to everybody for saying during family conversations, actually, so I'm sorry. So, as a elected tribal leader, I'm responsible for public policy for my tribe. And one of the best bits of advice that I've ever heard about public policy is don't do stupid stuff. Don't do stupid stuff. And we have it written in our office. Don't do stupid stuff. And you said, wow, Brian, did you spend a lot of money to get a lottery? Don't do stupid stuff. It sounds easy, right? Stupidity is doing something when you know you probably shouldn't, or not doing something when you know you probably shouldn't. So if we were starting from scratch today, if Enbridge came today and said, State of Michigan, we would like to build a pipeline under the largest source of surface fresh water on the planet, and then transport toxic chemicals through that pipeline. You guys good with that? We would say, no, that sounds really stupid, right? Because the benefits to us are far outweighed by the risks. We would say, we know we shouldn't do that if they were asking today. But they're not asking today. But if we know that we would not do this today, then we should put the burden on Enbridge to say, why are you allowed to continue to operate? So that's the approach that we take at Bay Mills. That's the approach that the tribes collectively have taken to this public policy approach. This pipeline, not all pipelines. You know, I want to remedy climate change. The tribes want to address climate change. And I will admit that pipelines in general are the safest and most efficient way to get oil and gas from point A to point B. I'm not going to stand here and pretend like it's not. But this pipeline is stupid. We wouldn't allow it if they were asking today, and we shouldn't allow it to stay. So, I was asked to come and speak with you about the tribal perspective on this issue. And I'm very grateful for having this forum, because a lot of folks hear tribes, tribal representatives, and tribal leaders come up and say, we have a treaty right, we have cultural interest. And if folks even stop to think about it, oftentimes they roll their eyes and say, what does that even mean? Well, I'll tell you what it is. The United States Constitution, right, the thing that we know and love, that governs the entire country, says treaties, treaties are the supreme law of the land. And when the United States started, those many years ago, it engaged in treaty making with Indian nations. Just like they would engage in a treaty with France, or England, or any other country, they engaged in treaties with Indian nations. Those treaties were ratified by the United States Senate and under the laws of the United States. Not some romantic notion of morality. The laws of the United States, those treaties, once ratified by the United States, become the supreme law of the land. Now, who here knows what year the state of Michigan was admitted to the United States? 1837. That's right. 1 year before that, in 1836, the United States came calling to the Anishinaabe people here in northern Michigan and said, we want to make a treaty with you. in exchange, we want you to sell all of your lands to us. And in exchange for that, the tribe said, okay, we will do that, you will pay us, you will take on a trust responsibility for us, but we're going to keep our right to hunt and fish and gather medicines throughout the land that we're selling to. Now that was a pretty good deal. So the United States took it, acquired all of this land here in Young. And it was that treaty and that land purchase that allowed Michigan to become a state of the United States. So on behalf of Bay Mills and the rest of the Anishinaabe people, you're welcome. But I would ask you to stop and think for a minute about the people, the Anishinaabe people who were entering into that treaty. Because there was a lot of pressure for them to enter into that treaty. It was unpleasant. It wasn't necessarily a willing transaction. Now think how difficult a choice that might have been to sell your homelands. Knowing that those people are selling the place they call home and giving it up. Think about the fact that they made the conscious decision to say, but we're not selling our right to hunt and fish and gather our medicines in this territory. That tells you exactly how important those practices were to our people then, and how important they envisioned those practices would be to our people in perpetuity going forward. We're willing to give up, or not willing, but we're giving up our home. But we're not giving this up. Why? Because it is central to our identity as Anishinaabe people. Anywhere around the world, when you have people living along bodies of water, you can expect that fishing, seafood, all that stuff is going to be important. And it is no less true for Anishinaabe people here in Michigan. So the land was given up, the right was reserved. And we have fought and prevailed in legal victories to maintain and exercise that right. We have members of our tribes in northern Michigan who earn their living by going out on these waters and catching fish every day. And you can eat some of that fish here on the island and in other restaurants. Bay Mills has the best fish, just FYI. And this continues to define who we are. If you were to drive through the Bay Mills Indian community on a day like today, in the morning or in the evenings, you would see driveways with fishing boats in them. You would see people out drying and maintaining their fishing nets. You would see trucks pulling trailers with boats on them. I mean, you could not drive through our community and come through to any other conclusion but that Bay Mills Indian community is a fishing community. And it always has been. We have folks who risk their lives to go out and exercise and fight for that right. Fishing on the waters of Lake Superior in the fall time in the dark so they can avoid getting arrested. Getting beat by people who were less enthusiastic about our treaty rights. Getting arrested. The gentleman who lived down the street from me, his name was Big Abe. I'll let you figure out why his name was Big Abe. But his name was Big Abe LeBlanc. And he was a tribal member, and in the 1970s he called the DNR. He said, hey, DNR, how you doing? I'm going out tomorrow morning in Pendles Bay, and I'm going to fish. I'm going to do it without a Michigan fishing license. And I dare you to come do something about it. So Michigan DNR came out, cited him, arrested him, charged him with a crime of fishing without a state license. That case went to the Michigan Supreme Court in the 1970s, which affirmed that our tribes have the treaty right to fish today. And ever since, actually after that case, the United States came and sued the state of Michigan for violating our treaty rights. And ever since that decision in 1979, the 5 Anishinaabe tribes in northern Michigan have been managing the Great Lakes fishery all through here in concert with the state of Michigan and the federal government under agreements. So, Indian rights extend off the reservation. They extend throughout the ceded territory, and by the United States Constitution itself, those rights secured in the treaty are the supreme law of the land. Supreme meaning they supersede local ordinances. They supersede state laws. They supersede state regulations. Those rights, our rights, those very special rights, are the supreme law of the land. Now look right in the middle of this yellow territory where we're sitting, it's Straits of Mackinac. Now, a couple of years ago, well, over a period of many years actually, out west in the state of Washington, the tribes there enjoy a similar right to fish. And the state of Washington had done this big road infrastructure project and put all these culverts under highways that prevented salmon from getting upstream to get to where they spawn. And salmon were dying out. And the salmon were dying out and the tribal fishermen had nothing to catch. And so the tribe went to court and said, the state of Washington, you are violating our treaty rights. And the state of Washington said, we're not violating your treaty rights, we're not arresting you, we're not preventing you from catching fish. And the tribe said, but you are depleting the fish stock by your actions. And if there are no fish, our treaty right on paper is meaningless. By putting in these road culverts that prevent salmon from spawning, you are impairing our right. So they had a big lawsuit. The state of Washington went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court last year. The state of Washington said, my God, this is ridiculous. Road culverts, how can that even be related to a tribal treaty? And if you make us do this, it's going to cost us billions of dollars to go tear out all these road culverts and replace them so the salmon can get upstream. This is nonsense. And the Supreme Court last year upheld a decision in the Ninth Circuit that said, actually, the treaty right to fish means nothing if there are no fish. So guess what, state of Washington? You better open up that checkbook because you have a lot of road culverts to replace. What that means for us here with respect to an Enbridge pipeline tunnel or the existing pipeline or all these saddle anchors or screw anchors or whatever they're calling them, is that directly impacts our right to fish. And Jim was talking about them doing this analysis of where does it touch the bottom of the lake bed. We're only going to look there. We have been kicking and screaming and begging state and federal agencies to say, actually you have a legal obligation to assess the risk of this pipeline to our fishery. And it's been a very frustrating learning exercise for us and for me because you go to the DEQ and they say, well, we don't have jurisdiction over the design of the screw anchor. We can't talk to you about that. And then you go to the EPA, and then the EPA says, well, actually, we only look at the water quality itself. We don't do pipelines. You go to FERC, and FERC says, we do natural gas pipelines. This isn't a natural gas pipeline. So you go to PHMSA. I didn't even know what a PHMSA was. Pipeline Hazardous something agency. And they say, actually, we don't regulate pipelines either. We go and look at what's in the pipeline. So you go to the Army Corps. And the Army Corps says, well, we only examine where the pipeline touches the lake bed, and we don't do the design of the pipeline. And at one point, out of exasperation, I told the Army Corps guys, I said, you know, we once tried to do a break wall in our tribal community, and you gave us just years of grief over the design of this break wall. So you are scrutinizing a little break wall on our reservation and the design of that and the impact on the environment more than you're scrutinizing the design of this pipeline. And aren't you called the Army Corps of Engineers? Isn't this what you're responsible for? And they shrug their shoulders. You chase these guys from one place to another. But we have been working and thankfully with the support of the community here, and now the new administration, the new Attorney General, to have folks understand that state of Michigan, in particular, those of you who are taxpayers in the state of Michigan, if you operate and permit this pipeline to operate in a manner that puts at risk the continued existence of fish here and here in such a way that we have no fish left to catch. Well, the state of Washington had to spend over $2 billion to replace those culverts I was explaining. What do you think the liability would be? And now, as a recovering lawyer, it's not beaten all the way out of me yet. I do think in terms of liability on occasion. And I can assure you that Bay Mills Indian Community and our Anishinaabe tribes under our treaty rights, if we cannot exercise those rights because there are no fish, then somebody is going to have to pay for the lost income for our current and future fishers for not being able to carry on our way of life. So that's where we come into play with our treaty rights. I want to briefly, though, touch on one other thing. Because I come and speak at events like this to talk to folks about the pipeline and our treaty rights, because economic interests are usually what resonates with folks. But I want to talk about our spirituality and our religion as Anishinaabe people. So I was raised Catholic, and I've moved around. My parents and my family's moved around from time to time. And one of the things, those of you who may be Catholic or of any other faith know, that when you move, your religion is not impaired, right? If your house burns down, or your church burns down, or your church moves to a bigger, better church, you can still practice your religion. Right? If you lose your Bible, you can buy a new one. And that does not impact your connection to those who came before you, your God, your ancestors, because your ability to practice is based on text and scripture. For most indigenous people around the world, our religions are place-based. There are ceremonies that have to occur in certain places. There are certain places where our stories tell us important events happened. And when those places are degraded, we can't buy a new place to fill that spot in our religion. We don't, it's not like a Bible or a church. When a ground where fasting ceremonies happen is cut down or opened up to recreation, that place is gone to us. It doesn't come back. It doesn't get replaced. And our spirituality as people is eroded. It's chipped away in a way that we don't get back. So we literally lose our religion as we lose these places. Now, in our history, and it's not appropriate for me, especially this time of year, to share in detail some of our stories, so I'm not going to do that, but I do want to ask forgiveness for just sharing an overview of one important story. For Anishinaabe people in our history, there was a great flood. Right? Like many of you are familiar with the story of Noah. And there was a flood over the earth, and many lives were lost for all species. And then after that flood, the Creator came and put land on the back of a turtle to form a new earth for us to live. And so we say the turtle bore the weight of the world on his back so that we can live. Now, does anybody here who is not a tribal member anywhere, does anybody here know the Anishinaabe word for turtle? Mackinac. 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 Right here. This is where our stories tell us that this happened. Right here on this island is that. So, if the pipelines were to burst, if oil were to wash upon these shores and the shores around here, it would literally be degrading and eroding and devaluing the very place where we say life was reborn on this planet. So when you see our people, and I know we've got tribal members here, we've got folks from the Mackinac Day who had to leave. get emotional about this, get frustrated, scream and yell, get arrested for this stuff. It is not only for our treaty rights, which are important. People gave their lives for that. But it's for this too. Because if it goes away, we don't get it back. So I'm honored and grateful to have this time to share that with you. I'm honored to stand beside those of you who want to join this fight to protect our waters and protect this place. And I am grateful for the chance to carry this on for Bay Mills Indian community and all of the tribes and everybody who's interested. So miigwech, thank you. One of the challenges also is, as I was describing, these multitude of government agencies at the state and federal level. Where do you file? Who do you file your lawsuit against, and on what basis? Jim's right about the Attorney General's case, but there's a challenge here because there's no decision that says oil runs and oil doesn't run. Flip the switch, shut it off. And that's why the comment earlier about losing the PR battle. This is a slog, and it's going to be fought on a lot of different fronts, and the victories will be small, and there will not be a big, raucous legal victory like in the movies and somebody turns off the switch. These guys are very good at moving the chess pieces around the board with these different agencies and decision processes. So, go back to your question. The challenge is, who do you sue? What are you asking for? Where are you going? There are corresponding federal processes, and the EPA and Department of Justice have sued Enbridge for the Marshall spill, and then when they were settling that, they snuck in stuff about the Line 5 pipeline and the Straits Crossing in particular. So a year ago, they were trying to amend that stuff to sneak even more things in to make it easier to get all these permits. And the Chippewa Resource Authority tribes met with the Department of Justice and the EPA, and Traverse City Captain was there. And it was a very contentious meeting, but at one point in that meeting, the attorneys for the U.S. Department of Justice told us, many people in the room, and I take copious notes. Again, I have these meeting journals I keep, and others do, told us that Enbridge was in violation of its easement with the state, in the federal government's view. Which was a surprise to us, and then they tried to, of course, soften that and caveat it and walk it back when they saw our eyebrows go up. There was a lot of us in the room for that. So